Howdy there, Isaac here. Today we'll be continuing one of my favorite stories to date, the story of the Crimson Criminal joining the League of Villains. And really, the League would be far better with the inclusion of Stain, and the slightly faster maturity of Shigaraki. The League would end up surviving the forest raid and even capture Tokoyami as well. Every member of the League would end up surviving thanks to Shigaraki's two-man team policy. Oh, and we saw Ida and the Pussycats fall to Stain's sword. I think I got the basics down, so let us continue the story of this villain academia. What if Stain joined the League of Villains? The story starts now. 3 students dead, 3 heroes killed, and 1 missing hero in action. And the villains had all escaped, leaving the heroes with little information on their whereabouts. This headline would not stop repeating all throughout the night and up until 2 days later. Izuku and company would gather around, though not in the hospital since the green-haired nerd wasn't as injured as in canon. Every one of the students felt bad about what had happened, especially that 2 of their comrades were taken. The teens would all still come to the conclusion that they needed to go and save their friends, only this time Shoji would also be joining the team. In canon, Shoji was frustrated and teetering on siding with Kirishima, and with 2 students taken, I think his frustration would be pushed over the edge. Shoji would want to help out in any way he could, and with him being uninjured, I think he'd end up going. Meanwhile, the police would still track down the League of Villains and request the aid of pro heroes. Instead of recruiting Tiger, since they're, dead, the police would recruit Fat Gum, since he was already accustomed to secret missions. I also think Ryukyu, the dragon hero, would be recruited, along with Crust, the shield hero, since the League has a much bigger roster. Ryukyu and Crust would be perfect for fighting people like Stain, Muscular, and Moonfish. Back to the students, with no Ida to stop them, they would all roll out, though Izuku would have his doubts. Deku would make sure none of the students would try to fight, nor would they be too close to the danger, unlike in canon. He was trying to emulate Ida to make sure the class rep would be okay with such a thing, and to make sure nobody ended up like him or his older brother. Izuku here really was becoming the protector of this group, rather than focusing on saving Bakugo and Tokoyami. With that, the students would leave on their mission, with everything going pretty close to how it did in canon, only less enthusiastic. The UA interview would still happen, and start much like it did in canon, only this time Vlad is in bandages. UA would soon be on the back foot, however, failing to respond to the deaths of their students. The interview would still end with Aizawa bowing and saying he took full responsibility for what had happened, only this time the principal would do the same thing. Back in the bar, Shigaraki would watch the interview, leaving it on in the background as he talked to Bakugo and Tokoyami. The villain would order Mustard to release 2 students, which he would do begrudgingly. Bakugo, like in canon, would go on the attack, though Tokoyami wouldn't. See, the speech Shigaraki had given prior to their release had somewhat disillusioned him. No, Tokoyami isn't a villain, but he had actually listened to Shigaraki, unlike Bakugo. Tomura saw the slight hesitation and would capitalize on it. Mr. Compress, would you mind helping Kurogiri and I with Bakugo? He needs more time to think. With that, Shigaraki and Compress would close in on Bakugo, who was unable to counter due to Kurogiri warping all his explosions away. Thus, Bakugo would be turned back into a marble, while Tokoyami was left untouched. In this timeline, Shigaraki Tomura was far more confident in his actions, as well as his allies, since they all came back from the raid, meaning they actually had time to capture Bakugo once again. Shigaraki would turn to Tokoyami. Sorry, he was a little too aggressive. We do things a little more civilly than he does. I hope you'll be more inclined to talk, Tokoyami. The student would stay still, unable to speak. Part of him wanted to fight like Bakugo, but he knew he'd be turned back into a marble, or worse. Just then, a knock would sound off at the League's door. only for All Might to smash through it. And here's where the heroes get into some trouble. Moonfish has been in the background, eagerly awaiting the moment he could use his quirk and get some tasty flesh. Once he gets restrained by Kamui Woods, he would just spout out nothing but teeth, just barely avoiding his comrades. This would cause Gran Torino to change trajectory, meaning Dabi gets to burn himself free, along with Kurogiri and Moonfish. Luckily, Crust would break in and shield Kamui Woods and Torino from the attack, with Edshot being unable to put Kurogiri asleep due to Dabi's flames. Moonfish would begin getting even more excited, wildly swinging his teeth, cutting up Kamui's wooden prison. Shigaraki would know there was no way they could win like this, and call out to Kurogiri, yelling to warp as many Nomu as possible to their location. Best Butler Kurogiri would attempt to do just that, only to realize they were gone. Yes, like in the anime, the other hero team had successfully raided the Nomu hideout. Luckily for the League, Dabi's flames managed to free most of them, aside from Shigaraki, Compress, Lizard Boy, and Magni. This allowed Mustard to pull out his revolver and start firing at the heroes, along with Moonfish using his teeth. Dabi would be able to protect Kurogiri from Edshot, but this was only going to be an uphill fight. Shigaraki knew the League was on its last legs, and they had to retreat. Kurogiri! This time, though, someone else interrupted the League and the heroes. A rather raggedy and groggy Stain had entered the chaotic chat. 2 minutes earlier. Stain and Muscular had heard the commotion going on in the bar. Stain thought he could finally escape and finish what he started, only to realize the building was surrounded by police. Muscular was now awake and getting pumped up, even though his chest was still bothering him. Despite wanting to fight, the Hulk was hardly fit to do so, which meant he was staying with Stain. The hero killer would then think of a plan, realizing the League was his best chance of escaping capture. Hey Muscular, how would you like to land a punch right on All Might's face for me? Stain would hate to hurt All Might, but he thought the number one could handle a single punch. Unlike Muscular, Stain was still experiencing a plethora of pain. The hero killer's face had been horribly broken, the left side of it only being held up by bandages. And then there was the whiplash his neck had experienced, and let's not even mention the damage that reverberated throughout the rest of his body. It was nothing less than a miracle that he was even conscious at this point. Stain would tell Muscular to go into the room next door and wait for his signal, before using one of his short swords as a sort of crutch. Stain would hobble to the door before opening it and yelling at the top of his lungs, "Hey, quit all the racket, I'm trying to sleep!" The League of Villains and the heroes would all pause and stare at the greatly injured Stain, only for Muscular to burst through the wall and land a mighty punch on the symbol of peace. Before anything else could pop off though, All for One would teleport everyone away to safety, just like in the anime. The League, including Tokoyami and Stain, would be teleported to the Nomu hideout, where All for One had already defeated all of the heroes nearby, with Ryukyu and Best Jeanist requiring a second hit to knock out. Everyone would be confused, with Shigaraki asking why his master had come out. All for One would say that his apprentice had failed once more, though he wasn't disappointed, simply encouraging Shigaraki to try again. All Might would then come in and the fight between the two symbols would begin. All for One would fling All Might away before ordering Kurogiri to open a portal and get the League to safety. The mighty villain would then turn to Shigaraki. Think always, Tomura. Escape here and keep growing. Remember, this is all for your sake. Tokoyami was watching all of this go down, paralyzed in fear due to the presence of All for One. This would allow Mr. Compress to capture him, all while Izuku and company watched on. Izuku wanted desperately to run out and save his friends, but he just couldn't. He couldn't risk alerting the enemy to his friend's position, nor could he risk getting in All Might's way. He felt horrible that he allowed Tokoyami to be captured, but he just couldn't risk losing anyone else. Speaking of which, the symbol of peace, seeing that his student was just captured once more, would make him go berserk. All Might would fly in and begin to have an intense battle with his enemy, all while Shigaraki is being dragged towards the portal by Kurogiri. Most of the League had already left the scene, only Stain, Spinner, and Muscular were left. Muscular was simply enjoying the show, wishing that he could be fighting the symbol of peace. Stain was also mesmerized, while having an internal battle. The Crimson villain wanted to go with the League in order to continue his work, but at the same time, he wanted to help out All Might. What should he do? It wasn't like he cared about the League all that much, but at the same time, the villain looked towards Spinner, who was pleading for them to leave, then to Shigaraki, who was fighting to stay with his own master. But before Stain could think of anything, Gran Torino would arrive at the battlefield, instantly knocking out Kurogiri. The hero would attempt to attack another villain, only to be stopped by Muscular. The Big Hulk was ecstatic that there was someone he could finally fight, even if he was slightly injured. Muscular would keep the hero from hitting anyone else, but without Kurogiri, the portal would begin to close. Luckily for the League, All For One would use his forced quirk activation to keep the portal open, but only for a short time. All For One realized there was a small chance of victory, but he already had plans for the future. The villain would yell out to Stain, who was still unable to choose what path to take. "Hero Killer, take Tomura into the portal. We don't have much time." Stain would snap back to reality, looking over to Shigaraki. Stain wasn't entirely like the other villains in the League, but he did feel as if that was what made him belong there. He felt as if he needed to protect and shape all of these children in the League, especially Spinner and Shigaraki. Had his time with them softened him up? No. Stain wasn't ready to accept that he actually liked the League. This was just payback for them, saving him earlier. Yeah, now they would be even. Stain would turn to Spinner and ask for a knife before telling him to grab Kurogiri. The Hero Killer, despite being injured, would run up and cut Shigaraki's arm before paralyzing him. Stain would attempt to haul Shigaraki away, but he was greatly fatigued by now, hardly able to move his body, let alone Shigaraki's. By this time, Muscular had swatted Gran Torino out of the sky, but before he could kill the hero, Mountain Lady would pop up and smack him away. Muscular was also now getting slightly fatigued, not to mention the pain of being smacked by Mountain Lady, which would cause him to retreat for now, vowing they'd finish this fight another time. Spinner would come back out for Stain, helping him drag Shigaraki into the portal. As the villain disappeared, All For One would tell Shigaraki to continue the fight, and thus the League of Villains would be teleported to safety. The fight between All Might and All For One would go like it did in canon, complete with the United Door States of Smash! Izuku and company would start moving as the fight heated up, the shame of not being able to save their comrades greatly weighing on their shoulders. This shame would weigh especially heavily on Izuku's shoulders. This day would shape him much more than it did in canon. He'd vowed to become strong enough to protect everyone, as well as become a leader Ida would approve of. This would be the start of the cautious hero, Deku. Back in the League's new hideout, Shigaraki would be absolutely pissed. In canon, All For One forcibly made Shigaraki go into the portal, but here that wasn't the case. Here, there was someone else to blame. Shigaraki would grab Stain by his scarf in a moment of uncharacteristic rage. "You! Why do you listen to him? I could have stayed and helped him. We could have won!" Stain was too tired to properly fight off Shigaraki, and none of the other members of the League dared to move, not even Spinner. The lizard did want to intervene, but he didn't know what to do. Compress would tell Shigaraki to calm down, with Kurogiri doing the same. Surprisingly, Muscular would also speak up, telling Shigaraki to let the old man go. Shigaraki would loosen his grip on Stain, only for the Hero Killer to grab onto Shigaraki's arms and look him straight in the eyes. Your master knew what was going to happen. He wanted you to stay safe and to be able to continue your damn dream. Don't hate me because I listened to him and saved your ass. Shigaraki would get the urge to kill Stain, but he knew there was no merit in that. The villain's hateful gaze would soften before handing off Stain to Spinner. Mr. Compress, you're in charge. Make sure everyone is okay. Once Kurogiri wakes up, please allow him to look over Stain and Muscular. Shigaraki would then walk off, disappearing into one of the rooms within the hideout. Stain would breathe a sigh of relief. He was glad Shigaraki didn't decide to do anything irrational. UA, along with the rest of Hero Society, would come under fire for failing to rescue their students, and would be unable to track down the League. There are changes, and some major ones regarding Izuku, but this is My Villain Academia, so we're not going to explore those just yet. But once the Overhaul arc starts, we'll see some interesting little changes regarding the heroes. Back at Villain HQ, while everyone was attempting to recover, Shigaraki would be plotting. The villain figured he could use a way of getting funds, along with this doctor fellow that Kurogiri kept mentioning. Shigaraki would devise a plan for both. He'd let Kurogiri attempt to find this doctor, as long as he brought someone with him. As for money, well, he'd just look towards other criminal organizations. Shigaraki would send out Dabi and Toga to figure out what other big-time criminals were doing, as well as having Twice and Mustard investigate some small-time criminals. While Stain was bedridden, Shigaraki would occasionally come in and check up on him. The two often had debates on what to do with society, whether to completely destroy it or restructure it into a better one. Even other members of the League would join in and say what they wanted this new society to look like. Oftentimes the debates would get a little heated, but the League was always a friendly place at the end of the day. Stain had, over time, bonded with the League, even now being able to tolerate Moonfish, who also mellowed out due to Mustard's intervention. Stain had also taught Spinner some new moves, even sharing his training regimen with the Lizard Boy. Now, Spinner wouldn't get as strong as Stain, though he definitely gets a small speed boost and strength boost. The biggest change, though, would come with Shigaraki, who we already saw is better at plotting. I think the investigation into the criminal underground would lead Shigaraki to the drug market. More importantly, the trading of quirk-enhancing drugs, such as Trigger, and a rumored quirk-neutralizing drug. Once Kurogiri left, along with Moonfish, Shigaraki would call Stain and Dabi into his little meeting room. Shigaraki would now announce his big plan, a war on those who controlled this illegal snow industry in Japan. After several weeks of Dabi following nose candy dealers, Shigaraki had figured out where all the dope flowed from. There was a group of criminals close by called the Yakuza. Shigaraki would look to Stain. I know it's not your usual target, but how would you feel about killing some criminals, hero killer? Are you kidding me? I've been out of commission too long. Some villain scum would be perfect for a warm-up. Shigaraki would then discuss his plan of attack, which included a few things that Stain was somewhat uncomfortable with. Thanks to Stain's involvement in the investigations, I think Shigaraki would come up with some more concrete plans than in canon. Tomura would send a few League members in order to gain their enemy's trust. From there, the League would send in 2 more members with the orders to find allies, and slowly turn the lower level grunts against the others. After that, Shigaraki and the others could walk in and kill everyone in the dead of night. The plan was much more complex than that, but Shigaraki figured he had more time to think of the specifics. Stain wasn't entirely comfortable with trusting a few members all alone with an enemy organization, with Dabi offering Mr. Compress, Spinner, and Magni to go, since he thought they were the most mentally sane out of the League. While the three were meeting and attempting to figure out some sort of compromise, Twice and Mustard would be approached by a small gang of criminals. The criminals would say they were looking for the League of Villains, saying they wanted to join. Twice, being the naive person he was, would lead the criminals to the League's hideout, with Mustard saying it was a bad idea all along the way. Sorry, Mustard, Twice is the adult here, and what he says goes. Anyways, Twice would barge in and tell Shigaraki that there were some people looking to join the League. This would intrigue Shigaraki, who would tell Stain and Dabi to gather everyone together. Stain was pretty suspicious of people wanting to join the League this late in the game, especially people who didn't go through the League's broker. But he still wanted to see what these criminals were like. Overhaul would step into the room, though this time he'd walk in with Mimic and Shield. The conversation would go much differently than in canon, since Shigaraki managed to keep the League all together. Thus, the Yakuza leader would have to explain what his plan is in more detail. Overhaul would say he needed the League of Villains name in order to improve his chances of getting funds. The Yakuza wouldn't try humiliating Shigaraki like in canon, but instead say he could offer the League a better living situation, along with helping them achieve their goals. Unfortunately for Overhaul, Shigaraki saw right through all the BS. He knew the Yakuza was simply trying to butter him up, but he used this to his advantage. I think this could work. We have been low on funds, so if you helped us out once you got those investments, I think we could have a deal. Everyone in the League would look at Shigaraki like he was crazy, but the villain knew just how important an ally could be. Shigaraki definitely means to betray Overhaul, only after he gets everything he wants. How about this, Overhaul? You take 2 of our members for now. If everything goes well, you let the rest of us come into your base and make me your right-hand man. Shigaraki was trying to butter up Overhaul, making him think he was the one in charge here, that Shigaraki was some sort of beta male. Some of the members of the League would protest this, even Chrono getting a little jealous that he would be replaced, only for Shigaraki to ignore them. Stain was the only person there who knew what Shigaraki was up to, with almost every other member upset at what was going on. Overhaul would agree to these terms, actually somewhat happy with the outcome. He just got the sweetest deal ever, a name that had power, and more importantly, some very powerful pawns. All he would have to do now is make the members of the League loyal to him. After Overhaul left, members of the League would begin to audibly complain, especially now that they may have to be in a structured environment, the exact opposite of what they wanted. Stain would sit back and watch as Shigaraki heard all these complaints. The villain would pull off the hand on his face. I trust all of you, completely. Please, trust me. Overhaul will get exactly what he deserves. If he thinks he can do better, I say we let him try. The members of the League would fall silent. They did trust Shigaraki, but they were still unsure about all of this. Tomura would then pull Stain to the side and tell him not to tell anybody else about their plan. Stain couldn't think of a reason why, especially since the villain just said he trusted all the members of the League. Shigaraki would then put the hand back on his face, before walking off deeper into the base. The villain would walk into a room full of darkness, a pair of large red eyes fixing their gaze on him. You said you needed time to think, but we may need you soon. How would you feel about helping us take care of villains, Tokoyami? The large shadow would grin, its sharp white teeth floating in the darkness. What kind of villains? Shigaraki would smile before closing the door behind him, explaining his plan to the former student. But that, fam, is where we'll be leaving it off for now. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, I ask that you leave a like and maybe even subscribe to join our little league. Have a great day or night wherever you are. That's it for now. Bye bye.